We have 1.1 million anglers, 700,000 hunters in our state, and our combined economic impact is $11.2 billion a year. So we know that we create and sustain about 170,000 jobs in our state, and we need to do the best that we can to advocate for funding and action to address and mitigate the impacts of wildlife disease, invasive species, and a warming climate. Bringing hunters and anglers together to the table with policymakers from both sides of the aisle is the critical first step in addressing the changing seasons.
Deer are important to the whole state of Michigan, both economically and culturally, and particularly the northern part of the state. In the northern part of Michigan, we are seeing some severe impacts on our deer population due to climate change. And those impacts are appearance of polar vortexes in the winter period, much deeper snows, and extended winter periods. In southern lower Michigan, the dry periods that have been brought on by climate change give rise to mud flats that encourage insects that carry Epizootic Hemorrhagic Disease to deer, EHD. That also is a catastrophic event that usually results in large losses of deer.
I've fished Lake Michigan for nearly 50 years, 38 as a charter boat operator, and I've noticed that the weather seems to be more extreme. If not seems to be, it is. And especially the last several years has seen more of a dramatic change with higher waves, more cancellations, stronger winds, constantly shifting thermoclines, constantly shifting current, and it all makes it difficult to be consistent fishing.
It's important for us to remember that the ecosystem, as we always knew it, had evolved over thousands of years. With climate change, we're seeing rapid changes over the span of only individual years. This changes waterfowl behaviors, it changes how they migrate, when they migrate, but it also affects their habitats. What we see primarily in the habitat is more intense and more frequent storms. That means more flooding or more intense droughts, and we can see an intense loss of habitat. This has not only impacts to the waterfowl specifically, maybe there's not enough habitat to support the populations, but it also can impact the economics. There's a lot of towns that are built around hunting and fishing communities, and if the ducks aren't there anymore, the hunters aren't there.
Trout and salmon are referred to as cold water fish, and that's because they require cold oxygenated water to survive and to thrive. In that sense, they're often referred to as a canary in the coal mine for climate change, because with generally warming conditions, they face the biggest struggles in the future. Some of the ways that we're already seeing climate change take effect on trout and salmon populations in Michigan is through increased severity, frequency, and variability of weather conditions. So how much water is flowing in the river at what time of the year is really critical to river habitat. Spring floods can cause losses of year classes. More frequent hot summer events can cause mortality of all ages of trout and salmon in a river. So we're seeing these effects already come to fruition.
Upland game bird species are absolutely being impacted by the effects of climate change here in Michigan. Our ruffed grouse are moving further north, and when they do that, they don't find the critical habitat they need. We have been experiencing more volatile weather events that's impacting their nesting success, and we have had an explosion of insects that are also carrying diseases to these species. On the pheasant side, we know that our farming practices over time have degraded the habitat, but we also know that these same volatile weather events are also impacting our pheasant populations.
Addressing these challenges will require wise investments in both habitat restoration and natural infrastructure. As Michigan moves towards cleaner energy solutions like wind and solar, care must be taken to ensure we protect fish, wildlife, and access to public lands and waters. Hunters and anglers and all people who enjoy outdoor recreation span all political boundaries and socioeconomic classes and hold a wealth of knowledge and experience. This creates a path to consensus addressing climate-induced changes. The fish and wildlife we all enjoy, whether fishing, hunting, or simply watching, need solutions. A coalition of conservation groups, including MUCC and the National Wildlife Federation, have formed the Changing Seasons Work Group that is working towards addressing the impacts of climate change in Michigan and what steps can be taken to mitigate its impact on fish and wildlife. Protecting clean water, maintaining access to public lands, and making science-based decisions on wildlife and forestry management are our priorities. We need new incentives and investments to address the ongoing effects of climate change.
So here in Michigan, we enjoy world-class hunting and fishing and outdoor recreation opportunities. However, that quality of life is at risk due to climate change. Right now, Michigan is facing several impacts from climate change. Namely, our Great Lakes are at an all-time high water levels, and that's problematic for our coastal habitat, in addition to the private property damage we're seeing from dune and soil erosion. We're seeing intense rain events that is causing flooding across our upland game habitat for pheasants and ruffed grouse. We're also seeing extended periods of heat and drought, which is causing further stress upon our moose population, not to name our cold water fisheries, namely trout. And that's why the hunting and angling organizations here in Michigan realize that we can no longer sit on the sidelines. We have to be at the table because we're seeing these changes and we want to do something about it. That's why we created the Changing Seasons Work Group, which really is about pulling ourselves together, uniting our organizations and under one voice and advocating for policies that are more protective of fish and game. We know this is important because we want to pass on our hunting and fishing traditions to our kids, their kids, and future generations. That's what Changing Seasons is all about. That's what's at stake, and that's what Changing Seasons is trying to protect.